Good evening, and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy. Today is February 28th, 2018, and I have before me a copy of yesterday's New York Times, and I'm just going to go through it and talk about some of the articles. I also wanted to mention that the era of the new authoritarian era that New York Times claims is happening is maybe not happening. I think what New York Times is actually hinting at is that by some strange stretch of the imagination, Donald Trump is an authoritarian figure. But we have to remember that over and over and over again, our president, Donald Trump, has abided by the rulings of various courts, the Supreme Court, the Ninth District Court, and has been prevented from doing what he wanted to get done. So this, by its very nature, shows that he respects our system of government, which has its checks and balances, the judicial, congressional, and the executive branch, the three branches which are deliberately given equal power. Each branch is supposed to have equal power so that one can provide a check for the other in case one gets too much power or attempts to get too much power. This is essential for a democracy to work. So in other words, in a democracy, in our republic, the whole system is set up so that it's difficult to get things done. This is what is disadvantageous to some people. They want to see things get done. This is how people get to the point where they want a dictator. They want an authoritarian figure because an authoritarian figure gets things done. And if a person or a group can find a leader who will get things done that advances their agenda, their way of looking at the world, their hopes for the future, their prosperity, then oftentimes they will put all their eggs into one basket and give that leader the power, that power to get it done. That's the advantage. That is why the German people really liked Hitler when he first came to power. Even though he used ruthless means, including murder, to achieve power, he was actually elected to power in Germany. And when he took the reins of power as a dictator, as chancellor, a virtual dictator, he did a lot of good things that people liked. He built the Autobahn, which is still in existence today, and it anticipated the future by decades because it was a very modern highway, a four-lane highway that connected cities and was a forerunner of today's highway system that you see across the world. America's four-lane highway system with very safe entrances and exits, and the modern superhighway was anticipated by the Autobahn. And this was an idea that Hitler thought was a good idea, and so he was a dictator, so he just said, okay, go do it. And then he wanted his people the German people to have inexpensive vehicles that they could drive on the Autobahn, and he came up with the idea, or he listened to people who had an idea for a people's car. And that became the Volkswagen, which means people's car, basically. And so he had a lot of left-wing ideas, too. The old Weimar Republic was much more democratic, much more centrist or right-wing. But he, being a national socialist, instituted a lot of socialistic programs. This is why a lot of socialists and communists in the Nazi era, joined the Nazi Party enthusiastically. So when people say that the Nazis were right-wingers, this is not necessarily true. The brilliance of Hitler, and not that he was great, he was a madman. The horror of Hitler was that he had a brilliant idea, which was to join nationalism with socialism into one party. So you got elements of what people on the right liked, which was nationalism, and elements of what people on the left liked, which is socialism. What he did that was so horrific was to begin to repress his people, anyone who dissented or anyone who could become used as a scapegoat, to blame the problems that immediately began to develop, as is inevitable in a situation where all power is given to one man or one group of people. This is inevitable that they're going to try to blame others for what they do so they can stay in power. If you take responsibility for what goes wrong, you will not last long. And this is the beauty of a republic that has an ongoing revolving door, so to speak, of leaders, where you have in the United States every 4 to 8 years you change out and get a different leader of a different party, oftentimes. The American people are very good at switching from one party to the other party. Usually after 8 years they're ready to switch to the different party. But with Hitler, you saw an example of a popular leader who actually ended up destroying huge parts of his own country, as well as other people's country. Because the model that he created, his financial backers said, okay, take this model across Europe, and we will back you. We will finance you. Where do you think Hitler got the money to build this enormous military machine, the biggest the world had ever seen at that time, in Germany? You know, yeah, he put people to work, because remember, if you know a little bit about the history, the mark actually, the currency was hyperinflated. Everyone lost all their savings. They went through in the 1920s this enormous disaster. Then you have the incredible hit of the global worldwide Great Depression. And Hitler was able to bring people out of that depression in Germany. They put them to work, building the Autobahn, building Volkswagen, doing all these other projects, because he could just say, do this, do this, do this, do this. And he got everybody going. And of course, part of it was building, battleships, tanks, guns, bombs. And his backers, the people who financed him, these were international financiers, some of them from America and other places around the world, because they saw in Hitler an opportunity to unify Europe under this despotic control, who was their guy, the controller, a dictator, who was their guy. He was beholden to them. And they thought, if we can just unify through a very quick takeover, a violent, forceful takeover, and then have Germany run Europe, then this will be good for us. This is one of the plans that globalists use to unify. And so that didn't work. And why did it not work? Because people understood that this effort was trouncing on their rights. And marginalized groups like the Jewish people were suffering tremendously under this system. And they would not allow it. They would not allow it. And they thought, you know, this is not the way to go. Now remember, the Fabian Society, which still exists actually, wants the exact same result that the people who backed Hitler wanted. And the Fabian Society, being based in England, is advocates a gradual, essentially nonviolent change to a worldwide socialist system run by a small group of men, a globalist, very undemocratic system. Socialism is, by its very nature, undemocratic. It is not a republic. It attempts to appear to be democratic, but it really isn't, because some groups are favored over other groups. Oh, this group here is, you know, suffering. We're going to help them. We're going to take money from this group and give it to that group. And always the opportunity for graft, for fraud, for corruption is tremendously high in a socialist system because there's so much power and there's very little oversight. Who is going to tell the rulers of, or hold the rulers of a socialist system to account? Because it's all the power is concentrated in a small group. Whereas in America, it's divided. Whereas when, you know, in America, we see this ability, and it's not completely successful. It never has been. But there is the opportunity to rebalance an imbalance that's extremely dangerous when one group, like the executive branch or the judicial branch, gets too big, too powerful. They can be shut down. So the ends of the English and the Western idea, which is a gradual evolution into a globalist socialist system, has worked so far much better than a violent takeover. Now, we saw in China a violent takeover that did work, and we're seeing the results of that. The communists who took over in 1949, 1950, and overthrew the old monarchy, which is the emperor, fought with the nationalistic democratic forces and threw them out. And now they control. And we've seen a new effort in China, and this is on the front page of the New York Times. China leaps to the front of a new authoritarian era. A global shrug as XI joins the ranks of strongmen. And then the writer of this article goes on to claim that we're seeing a rise in authoritarianism worldwide. And he's maybe somewhat right, but also somewhat wrong. And he takes a little sideways swipe at Donald Trump, saying he's authoritarianism, even though he shows no evidence of being that way at all. Because he keeps getting stymied by the courts and the Congress. They tried to completely get rid of Obamacare. They failed because Donald Trump is not a dictator. A dictator gets things done very quickly. No, there's no one there to stand against him. Anyone who stands against him is killed or jailed or intimidated. If Hillary Clinton had become president, you can be guaranteed she would have looked much more like a dictator than Donald Trump. because she would have had the full power of the press, the mainstream media, on her side. She would have her courts heavily leaning toward her. She probably would have gained control in at least the House, if not the Senate. And so she would have been able to, by fiat decree, change the way that this country is run. And one of her first acts would have been to reduce the ability of the American people to have firearms very quickly. That would have happened. And we're seeing an attempt still being made, but it's not being nearly as successful. It's not nearly as successful as it was. Yes, there is an attempt. There is an attempt because of the shooting that happened it's been 12 days ago or 13 days ago, almost 2 weeks ago now. But will it succeed? Very unlikely, because way too many Americans understand the meaning of the Second Amendment. You know, the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, the operative part of this sentence is in other words, the subject and the verb would be the part where it says, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The first part of the sentence, which is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, essentially describes the major reason, the main reason that the founders believed it was important that the people should have the right to keep and bear arms. And that was to secure the freedom of the state. And you might argue, well, we don't have a militia. A militia, I'm assuming, would be the 18th century equivalent of a standing army. Now, we do have a standing army, but we don't call it, we have the National Guard, we have the state National Guards, which could almost be the equivalent of a militia. But the idea that's conjured up by the Second Amendment is that if there is an emergency, that there will be enough men, or perhaps men and women, the people, they will have knowledge of firearms, and they will be able to use those, to grab those firearms, and in an emergency, go off. And it says a well-regulated. And people say, well, you know, well-regulated, that means that they shouldn't be allowed to carry certain types of firearms. There's no hint or implication in the term well-regulated that is a reference to firearms. Well-regulated means in good order, means well-trained, well-disciplined, well-commanded, regulated. What does regulated? Regulations. Regulations means laws. In other words, they have to be disciplined, they have to be under the rule of law, they have to be well trained, and that's what it means, well-regulated militia. And I would posit that the first part of the Second Amendment means we're talking about the military. Because in this 18th century, it was not necessarily assumed that the state that the government, that the country would have a standing army, a permanent standing army, military, like we do. We have a permanent, so you could say that we live in the 21st century, and this is what we have is, in our military, is the equivalent of a well-regulated militia. And of course, the founders understood that the people have to be familiar with firearms in order to participate in the defense of the freedom of their state, if it were so required, the security that's required. And yeah, there are many, many instances in which the military has been used in the United States to enforce the peace. And sometimes it's been misused over the years by the government to enforce the peace, in some people's view. You know, sending out the military, for instance, to quell strikers, you know, because in the 1930s and the 1920s, you had huge numbers of very unhappy people who were willing to resort to arms to have their demands met. There was the Bonus March, I believe, after World War I, where veterans apparently were promised a bonus when they came back, but then they didn't get it. They banded together, marched on Washington. The Army was sent out to keep them under control. And this is one of those things that you could say, well, that was wrong. Well, America's done many, many things wrong. That's for sure. But now we have, on the front page of the New York Times, what is the most unsettling development. Because, and this is unsettling to the Chinese too. The Chinese who still live under the rule of communism are fearful of criticizing the government in any way. I've talked to Chinese when they come over to the United States and ask them, well, how are things going in China? And they are like, well, fine. You know, you could feel the fear, the reticence right away. And it's only here, when they're here a while, that they loosen up and they get a little more relaxed. They've been trained from birth to fear their government. And so now you have this new step, which flies in the face of what I would argue would be reforms and a movement globally towards democratic institutions. And to say that a global shrug as Xi joins the ranks of strawmen, hey, I'm not shrugging. Now maybe our leaders are shrugging. And why are they shrugging? Why do they not appear to care? Is it because they think this is a good idea to have Xi, the president of China, essentially become a dictator, even more than he is now, who cannot be voted out of office and is just there for life? No term limits. That's what Xi wants. Right now, China has term limits. 2 5-year terms of office, that's the most you can spend in office. But Xi wants to stay in office indefinitely because, oh, he has a plan. And guess what? Apparently he is popular in China. At least as far as Chinese leaders are popular. Who can know truly whether Xi is popular in China? Because China has intense levels of censorship, so people cannot question their government. They cannot criticize Xi without getting in trouble. So of course he's going to be popular because everyone is afraid to speak up against him. Now there are dissidents who live mostly outside of the country who are complaining about this. That's because they feel perhaps a little safer that they're out of the clutches of the Chinese secret police or whatever the equivalent of the CIA or FBI or KGB, whatever. You know, they feel maybe a little safer, or they're just bold. They're just bold people. But this is not a good thing. The argument that the writer is making is that, oh yeah, this is a trend we're seeing globally, including in Hungary. In Hungary, what we're seeing in a lot of these Eastern European countries and countries around the world is a resurgence of nationalism. And people, you know, whenever you say nationalism, for some reason you think that's racism. That's racist to be nationalism. It's absolutely not true. Mexico is very nationalistic. The Mexicans love Mexico. They want Mexico to continue as a country. If I wanted to move to Mexico, I cannot just move to Mexico and without any papers and just live there and, you know, just plug into their welfare system, such as it is. I mean, I could be thrown into a horrific Mexican jail for that, and then presumably eventually deported. I would not be welcomed with open arms into Mexico, because that would be an aggression against Mexico's national sovereignty if they were to just ignore that. The same thing in Canada. My nephew got in a lot of trouble for smuggling 2 people into Canada. He got caught and he got put in jail for a while for that. He was just a young, dumb kid. He wasn't doing it for money. He just thought it would be cool. I mean, somebody said, "Oh, we don't have any papers to get into Canada. Could we hide in the back of your truck?" "Okay," he goes, or something like that. Yeah, they impounded his truck. His parents had to come rescue him. It was a nightmare. Now, what we're seeing in the United States is people cross over the border and people say, well, you know, we'll take you in. Where do you want to go? We'll put you on a bus and you can go to the town that or the city that you want to go to. And this is the open border policy. And the reason, of course, that America is supposed to have open borders, and you're racist if you're not for open borders, is because there are very powerful forces that consider the United States a threat. Because why? Why would they consider the United States to be a threat? Because the United States is the bastion of freedom, of democratic ideals. America is an operational republic. America has a constitution that is over 200 years old, by far the oldest continuously running system of government in the world. We, as Americans, can be very proud that we have that record. We hold the record for the longest continuing system of government, unbroken system of government. We survived, our unbroken system of government survived a horrific civil war that most countries would not have survived, very bloody. And attempts to overthrow the system of government from within and without. We have managed to survive for quite a long time. And this is a source of pride for many Americans. Other Americans believe that because of the mistakes and crimes that have been committed in America's name by unscrupulous individuals who were able to get power, that America should be abolished. And this it flies in the face of reason, because other countries almost invariably have committed horrific crimes against their own people, against other people. But because there's something about America that we are told that America is the greatest country on earth. So when we see America, people who rule in America committing horrific crimes, then we're very upset. Because we expect more out of America. I'm speaking personally. And this is other people who think the same way. I used to feel like, America is awful. Look at all these mistakes. But then if you compare, you can see that, well, okay, they're just awful, but there's so much horror going on in so many countries. You look at Germany, you look at France, you look at England, the other, Russia, China, India. India still has this unbelievably antiquated caste system. India is supposed to be the world's most populous democracy, but you go there, I have not been there, but I have friends who've been there. The poverty is just unbelievable. It's beyond anything we see in the United States. With people literally lying dead on the streets from starving, it's not that unusual apparently. Homeless people just everywhere. Families, generations. And they're enforced and they're kept in that position because they are limited, and they're under this tight structure that is pre-democratic, that hangs on this caste system. Supposedly it's abolished, but it really isn't. And so you look at America and you think, well, compared to that, we're doing really great. And it's no wonder, if you think of it that way, that so many people want to come here because they see opportunity to better their lives. And I understand that. But it is possible that so many people could overburden the system. And then the whole thing, they bring their poverty and their problems with them. Because it's not just the system, it's that keeps these countries having difficulties, tremendous difficulties. It's also the mindset of the people who do not understand the democratic ideal. And the democratic ideal is not that you get what you want, but it's the opposite. The democratic ideal is that you don't get what you want, that you get part of what you want, but the other guy gets part of what he wants. And it's the spirit of compromise. And unless you understand that, in other words, you have to get along and give a little. If you're going to get a little, then you can never live in a democracy. You can never live in a republic. And this is why places like Afghanistan, Iraq, so many other countries around the world, so many countries in Africa and South America, it's like, I want it my way. My way is the right way. Your way is the wrong way, and so we're going to fight. And unless people see that if you're going to get along with people, and this is just common sense, you have to give them something. You have to accommodate them. You have to treat them with a certain element of respect, that their ideas may have some merit, even though you don't agree with them. But maybe it might even help if you thought, well, let's look at it from their point of view. And I found that to be the case. Whether you're a socialist, a democratic socialist, or a communist, or if you're a committed free market type person, or somewhere in between, everyone in America has something to offer. And so the idea that we should have open borders, and all these people should come in who are fleeing a system that is not working for them, and they don't understand how you don't get everything you want in America. That's just the way it is. You know, they think, oh, America is the land of opportunity. I get everything I want. No, you don't get everything you want. You don't get to take over parts of America and institute Sharia law, for instance. You don't get to do that. You don't get to live in Mexico and still be, or a different Central American or South American country, and still live in America. You don't get to have it both ways. You only get part of that in America. If you did get everything you wanted, you would be bringing to the United States the exact conditions that you were fleeing from in the first place. And then we're actually seeing this happen. A lot of people from these countries like El Salvador, one of the reasons they're leaving is because they're being robbed. They're being killed. They're being oppressed by their government, by their neighbors, by gangs, by cartels, by rebels. You know, whoever has the guns, you know, can take away from them because they don't have guns. The criminals have the guns, but the government doesn't allow you to bear arms in most of these countries. So only the criminals have guns, so they run the show. The people who have the guns are the ones who they will oppress those who do not have the guns. And this is just a fact. This is just a fact. I mean, it was like, I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said, those who beat their guns into plowshares will be made to plow by those who do not beat their guns into plowshares. This is just an unpleasant reality, but is nevertheless a reality. And we've seen a lot of talk now about, I'm really not getting much to the New York Times, but the latest school shooting. The latest school shooting. This is not going to be the end of the school shootings. It may be, we may have found a solution to the school shootings, and that would be by arming administrators, teachers, janitors, now, or at least a few of them, to serve as a deterrent. We may be able to limit or stop, for the most part, school shootings with the use of security measures like armed guards, like metal detectors, like we have in public buildings. If we go to the courthouse, you must go through a metal detector. You must empty out your pockets, and those are examined every time you enter the courthouse. And it is unfortunate that it may have to be that way in the United States to enter a school, but if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. And America becomes more and more of an armed camp, like Israel. Israel, which has a huge problem because the Palestinians are searching for a way to get out of their situation, and they're using violent means or terroristic means to use that, probably because they have no other choice. I don't think people become terrorists just because they want to. I think they become terrorists because they feel like they have to, because they're feeling oppressed. And they also have a sense of a very you could say, old-fashioned sense that if you do wrong to me and there is no other form of redress, then I must, in order to preserve my family honor, my personal honor, my standing in the community, I must retaliate. And this is a traditional way that has been used throughout history to get the redress from wrongs. The idea of being able to go to a court and address your issues and before a jury and seek recompense or seek justice is a relatively new concept in human history. The Greeks take responsibility for the creation of the idea of the court. The Athena, the city-state of Athens, the Athenian people, created a court, and they believed that their gods were the ones that set this up for them. So you have the idea of a jury, you have lawyers for the defense and the prosecution, and you have a judge. Came, at least according to the Greeks, from their city-state, which was supposedly the world's first democracy. So the idea of a court is a democratic, part of those democratic ideals. The idea that you are innocent until proven guilty is also an American, it comes from, almost, I guess, uniquely American. Most countries do not supposedly have this guarantee that you must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. There's no situation in American law that says, prove you're innocent. Prove you didn't do this. That would be completely against the way that American jurisprudence works. And yet we're seeing many, many people in the United States who are not properly educated, young people, old people, who will label someone, you're a racist. And you say, no, I'm not. I'm not a racist. And they say, no, you are a racist. And because you're labeled a racist, that makes you a racist, according to them. That's all they have to do is say you're a racist. And what, of course, they're really saying is, you don't agree with me, therefore you are a racist. And it's a way of destroying them, or you're a homophobe, or you're a, any of the other ad hominem attacks that people use to harm political opponents, essentially political opponents, people who don't believe in them. People who criticize the wisdom of the teenagers, high school students, from the school in which the horrific tragedy of the 17 dead high school kids, actually 14 high school kids and 3 teachers, people who question the wisdom that guns need to be banned, or semi-automatic weapons need to be banned, or at least the larger magazines for the AR-15s should be banned, or the assault weapons should be banned, whatever it is that they want. They are being attacked by saying that they are anti-children, or in some way. They're awful people because they don't like children. You don't believe children, you don't like children. Well, there are so many questions about this attack. Sometime you should get online and you should look at the video of the high school student who said that she was talking to the Cruz boy while shooting was going on in the high school. and that she knew him. She went to junior high school with him. She made a joke, she said, that, well, I would have thought it was you who was doing the shooting. To the boy. She was walking out of the school with the boy. The story of the boy is that he took an Uber, a taxi, Uber taxi, to the school, got out of the school, walked into the school, suited up in armor, and then shot everybody, then took the suit, all the armor off, blended in with the kids, walked out of the school, and then he wasn't arrested until about an hour or two later. And people say, well, how did he get in that outfit so quick? Because the whole shoot-up took place in just a matter of a few minutes from the time he left the Uber. One of the teachers saw the shooter, and he was wearing a face mask and had a gun that she never saw before. I don't know what kind of gun it was. They're saying it was an AR-15. But a lot of, he was covered from head to foot in armor. His face was covered. He had a helmet with a face mask that she did not see his face. So do we really know whether this kid actually did it or not? There were drills either during or just before or weeks before, shooter drills. This is one thing we see over and over and over, is that there are either drills happening simultaneously with the actual attack or just before. Over and over and over we see that. And I would warn people, if a school is going to have a drill, a shooter drill, I would wonder and question if this school has not been targeted for a future attack or an attack simultaneous with the drill. On 9/11, there were multiple drills going on of airplanes flying into buildings. The same thing with the 7/7 attack, the infamous attack in downtown London. It blew up on a double-decker bus and also blew up a tube train underground, killed a number of people. There was a drill at the exact same tube station at the exact same time it was going on that the actual terror attack happened. And the chances of that happening are millions to one, that there would be a drill of a terror attack and a real terror attack simultaneously at the same spot, on the same day, at the same time. And yet, we are told, and you can look this up, by the authorities that that is what, in fact, indeed did happen on 7/7. That would be the English 9/11. Now, a lot more is going on in the news. We have Trump talking about what to do about future killings, mass killings in schools, and also making his usual comments in his very New York, Queens way, saying, I think I would have run into that school whether I was armed or not. Well, InfoWars pointed out an article in the New York Sun from the 90s. Trump would have been a fairly young man at that time, in which there was an article in which he stopped a guy from beating up another guy with a baseball bat on a New York street. He was in his limo, and they were headed toward the Holland Tunnel with his second wife, I think. And they say, oh, look, somebody's getting mugged. He told the driver to stop the limo, got out, went across the street, confronted the guy with the baseball bat, and said, what are you doing? You know, get out of here, basically. And the guy, according to witness, the guy came over and talked to him, recognized Trump, and then, dropped the bat and ran off. And so he got an article and this picture in the paper as a result of this incident, but it shows that Trump, maybe he is the kind of guy who would step in and actually do something. How many New Yorkers would stop and would do something about somebody getting mugged with a baseball bat? Not very many. Most New Yorkers try to ignore that stuff. They don't want to get involved. I mean, there have been stories about people screaming, getting murdered, and no one comes to their aid. Everyone just tries to ignore it. New York City is a very tough town. You want to stay out of trouble if you possibly can. You don't even look people in the eye when you're walking down the street. It's considered sort of bad form, impolite, to be looking at strangers, or walking down a New York street. So you sort of avoid them with your eye. You don't make eye contact if you possibly can. That would be the mark of someone like me from a small town who assumes that people are going to be wanting to look you in the eye as you walk down the street. It doesn't happen like that on the streets of New York. So we'll see. We don't know what Trump is like. One thing we do know is that Trump is a brash and bold character who is not afraid to confront people. And we just saw how he confronted Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea, and lo and behold, whether Trump had anything to do with it or not, nevertheless, for the very first time since the early 1950s, when North Korea and South Korea were set up, now there's some talk. There's a change. There's a thawing in the relationship between North Korea and South Korea. Did President Trump know how to speak Kim Jong-un's language? Not his actual language, but the spirit of his language. I would say yes. I would say that Trump assessed Kim Jong-un's personality, what the dictator of North Korea considered to be strength, and what he considered to be weakness. In fact, Trump actually stated this. He actually said he admires strength. He respects strength. In other words, we're going to threaten him. We're going to say, you can threaten us, but we are going to pound you into obliteration if you try anything. And we have way more nuclear weapons than you do. And of course the press made fun of him because he was talking about his hands, oh, my hands are big. So it was like, oh, that's toxic masculinity. Oh, how dare he do that? Well, hey, that's the way the world is. That's what many people in this world respect. They understand that kind of talk. That's all they understand. And a dictator, a strongman dictator like Kim Jong-un, understands that better than, oh dear, what are we going to do? Oh my goodness. He's going to blow us up and kill us. I'm so afraid. No, that's not going to work. That's just going to encourage him. It doesn't, sometimes you have to be you've got to threaten people. That's what you have to do. They don't give you any other choice. In fact, that's what they expect. Now we're seeing a new announcement by the president of Afghanistan in which the president of Afghanistan is saying, I think we're going to sit down with the Taliban and we're going to negotiate for peace with them, and there will be no restrictions, and these peace talks will be unconditional. And I heard this on NPR, and I immediately thought of unconditional surrender. Means no conditions. There will be nothing that will prevent us from talking because it's unconditional. And the NPR spokesperson was talking with a citizen, a high-level citizen of Afghanistan, a woman, and saying, well, it sort of sounds like the government of Afghanistan is giving in to the Taliban, like giving up. Oh, no, the woman says. No, we're not giving up. But I disagree with this tone, she says, with this unconditional stuff. We can't give up our Constitution. But and the Constitution is like, I guess like the U.S. Constitution, equal rights, equal pay for women. Now, the Taliban is a Sharia law-based group. They're religious, obviously, so it would be a return to, if the Taliban take over the government, then it will be returned to what we've had. So that means the 17 years of fighting, the longest war in American history, would be for nothing. And it turns out, apparently, the Taliban own most of Afghanistan anyway. This is just what we said from the beginning. It is the graveyard of empires. You do not win in Afghanistan when you try to conquer Afghanistan. You lose. And bingo, it's happening again. So that's all for today. Have a great weekend and sleep well.